Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L'Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. All right, so happy Valentine's, everyone. This is our last episode of the season. This is episode 13. And we are going to be looking at where we've been in the podcast and through the lens of love, because it is Valentine's Day. And of course, what we're thinking is a more abstract concept of love and, as a force rather than looking at like romantic love or platonic love, or just looking at love in general. Eryn, do you have anything to add about kind of the love lens that we'll be looking through today?
I think just that we will be looking at our previous episodes and considering how that force of love has shown up in them to kind of weave a through line through everything to wrap up this first season of our podcast. And I think it makes a lot of sense as we're wrapping up first season that the theme would be love, as you know, this is a labor of our love and our work together. So I'm excited to see where this takes us as we talk about our episodes in relationship to love. So L'Shawn, do you have a favorite episode that sticks out to you from our podcast series that particularly relates to the concept of love?
One thing that really sticks out to me is our episode on authenticity. And I also think about curiosity as well. But let me just take authenticity because I don't want to take too many episodes away because you'd like to talk about things as well. Authenticity to me is a reflection of love, because when you're looking at being authentic, whether it's showing up authentically or having an authentic conversation, it has to do with sincerity. It also has to do with being aware of your, I'm kind of grappling with this, but the true self, which what is that anyway? But I guess what I would say is your true self is you stripped of all of those societal norms, your identity as the different relationships, social relationships that you have, familial relationships that you have. When all of those things are stripped away, that's how I kind of see the true self. It's your essence, what you were born with before you were brought into a culture of your family, culture of your country, culture of your school, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that part of you that remains, what am I trying to say? Whole. And it's not, it doesn't really change. It's like that part of you that's, for lack of a better word, it's your essence. So when I think about authenticity and I think about our true selves, and I think that we are beings of love, that's where our true selves resonate, if that makes any sense. That's why authenticity really sticks out for me in terms of this lens of love, because to me, being authentic is coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place without fear. And to me, the opposite of love is fear. And so when I think of authenticity, I think that you do have to have a appreciation and a love of yourself and also other people to be authentic and to come from a space of authenticity. Eryn, do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, as you were talking about the being, and it's just that whole essence of oneself, it reminded me of that concept of just breaking open that we talked about, when sometimes in grief, your heart breaks open. And I think it's essentially broken open in the beginning without these other influences. So I'm just starting to make this connection to that concept of this open-hearted brokenness, or to the earliest forms of our being, which is an interesting space because it allows us to expand in our authenticity. Then it allows us to grow into our whole selves from this perspective of a love influenced being. And so that's where I started to think based off of like a previous podcast in terms of, authenticity and love. And I also started to come up with something completely kind of different in my mind and start to get more curious about this concept of authenticity and love and where, heartbreak happens or where, um, the difficult parts of love show up and how authenticity can be a key piece to mending those pieces in ourselves and between others. Um, and authenticity done from a space of love, like you said, not fear, but the ability to engage in conflict or uh, difficult conversations with that open heartedness. Uh, and so I kind of am going in different places right now in my mind between those concepts. But that's where I was headed in my thinking. And so processing that out loud, LaShawn, did anything else come up for you with the authenticity episode?
Well, I love that you mentioned the broken open because that makes me think of the layers of armor that we develop as we interact with our world, and we get certain reactions from people that could be unpleasant. And so we kind of build up this armor or maybe this casing. And so when you talk about broken open, I think about our true self being barricaded with this very thick, rigid barrier. And so when you talk about broken open, I imagine like an egg opening, or I imagine a wall splitting open. And one of the things that really came to mind when you were mentioning about broken open and authenticity, and again, going back to love, I believe that we need to be in a place of love where we feel safe and we feel like the people around us are loving and accepting. And so that was something that came up for me about love and how important it is to have like a safe space and have a loving space, which then brings me to our entire podcast, which is coaching as benevolence. So I think that we coach from a place of love, and our podcast is definitely a space where love is honored and appreciated, and we come from a place of love. That's what came up for me when you were talking about broken open and how it's related to authenticity. I really like the image of being broken open and having that sense of love and also acceptance, comfort, safety. That kind of thing is what's come up for me when you were talking about that. So, Eryn, what is your favorite episode or an episode that comes to mind? It can be related to authenticity or it could be something else. I know you did bring up the broken open part, which was one of our first episodes, I think.
Yeah, so just bringing up that safety concept, and you said love, acceptance, and safety, and automatically I thought of the episode 4 of Good Enough and Getting Better, being vulnerable in our, true selves, and you mentioned true self already in this podcast, and being okay with wherever we're at. And there's a sense of safety and acceptance and love that we hold when we're in that space of, being content with good enough and also having maybe continued goals or other things that we might be striving for or not. Just being who we are, right, is good enough. It reminds me of a shirt my daughter found the other day at Target. It was something just like progress over perfection. And it really spoke to her as a gymnast. Uh, and so I thought that was an interesting phrase to be, putting out there for young girls to recognize that, we can love ourselves wherever we're at and we can still be working towards something too. And that's where the coaching comes in. In my personal life, like I tend to be someone who likes to be working toward things and having goals that I have some movement toward, and be okay with also not meeting those and completely, switching but still having a purpose, I think. And I think purpose, that word ties so much to love And it ties a lot to that episode 4 on, good enough and getting better. And purpose can show up for anybody in the form of love in many different ways, whether that's in hobbies, in volunteer activities, in family or friend relationships, in career, in their love of art or music. So there's so many different ways that word shows up. And I really like thinking about how we can equate love and purpose together too. So, LaShawn, do you have other thoughts on good enough and getting better? Or is there another episode that's really speaking to you right now?
Well, funny enough, and I don't exactly know where the connection is, but when you were talking about good enough and getting better, and then the shirt that your daughter had, I was thinking about our episode on interdependence when you were talking about good enough and getting better, which is, I think, related to that because there is I guess, a certain need to be willing to ask for help when you need it, that kind of thing. Because I think that there is a need to ask for help when you need it. So that's one of the things that came up for me. And I can't really pinpoint why it came up, but it did come up for me when you were talking about good enough and getting better. And I do think that where the good enough and getting better ties in with love, as you were saying before, is the love of self and also acceptance of where you are and appreciating where you are. I think that's also really important. And I think appreciation is a space of love that comes from love. Appreciation of where you are, appreciation for what's to come, what's becoming, because good enough, getting better, that implies a process. It implies becoming. So those are the things that came up for me when I was listening to you talk about getting good enough and getting better. Anything else you'd like to add about that episode?
I like how you tied the interdependence piece into that, because one thing that stood out for me as you were talking about the concept of interdependence was that really the one aspect of good enough is having and accepting support around oneself, or seeking support when needed, and providing support to others when needed. So I just like where you were going with that. And then the word appreciation that you thoughtfully wove in there. I am starting to kind of make a list in my brain of some kind of key words that are coming up that might be nuancing what love really is, that is just coming up from our conversation right now. It's not the title of these previous podcasts, but so far it's, there's purpose and appreciation that are kind of sticking out in my mind, which I know there's a lot more than that to love, but it's fascinating to me. So that's, where I'm at. And then thinking about another podcast that we went through, I think I want to go back to gratitude, because it is sometimes linked with that appreciation concept. So the natural kind of segue from appreciation to gratitude. And I bring this question up for various groups that I have ran and that I'm currently running right now on grief, and just try to better understand and help others better understand where gratitude makes sense in grief and loss, and where it doesn't. And it's really interesting, some of the answers that people talk about or start to speak to. And there is this theme of appreciation. And, there's the concept of appreciation of beauty, but there's also the concept of appreciation of what is, what was, what's to come, who we are, who one's person is. So I think that's been coming up more recently too in some of the work that I've been doing. And on Valentine's Day, one of the traditions, at least I've noticed with, some of my kids, and then even growing up, expressing gratitude as part of Valentine's Day, whether that's to one's, teacher or family member, friend, that sort of thing. And I think with love, gratitude is so much a part of love relationship. So expressing that and having the opportunity to express that on Valentine's Day is nice. And it's just as nice to do that consistently. And also keeping in mind, not with this sense of false positivity or the sense of forced gratitude, because we know that can be unhealthy as well, but also just recognizing and holding that space for gratitude. And I do know that I mentioned in the podcast on gratitude that I tried a daily gratitude practice and it didn't work for me. And then after I reviewed that podcast, I was thinking a little bit more about why it didn't work for me. And I think it's, I tend to like the meditations every week or whatever on gratitude, but something that's daily for me just isn't fitting into my lifestyle all the time and not, working. So just having the chance to sit back and think about, if you're, listening, about how gratitude's showing up in your life and how it's working and not working for you and what you can shift. So kind of went on a few different points there on gratitude. But here we are, L'Shawn, with gratitude. What stands out to you on that subject in love?
Well, I'm right there with you with appreciation and gratitude. They go hand in hand. I was thinking gratitude exactly when you had mentioned gratitude. And I like that you brought up the point about forced positivity or forced gratitude. And that brings me to a thought of, again, love, because love is not forced, right? There's a Khalil Gibran poem about love. Probably love is not forced, or love is something. So love flows easily. And so when one is open to love, because love is always there, it's just a matter of being open to it. Again, that comes back to the broken open. Being open to love and receiving love, there, at least in my experience, love, there's no resistance in love. And so that was one of the things that came up to me about forced positivity or forced gratitude. We definitely don't want to force anything, because then that comes not from a place of love. And another thing that you were talking about is maybe the many aspects of love, or what is love. And I think that, as you were saying, purpose, appreciation, and I think it's that light flowing feeling of well-being. And I think that's also part of love. That's what's coming up for me with your discussion around our episode on gratitude. And also what resonated for me was what you said about grief, appreciating what was, appreciating what is, appreciating what is to become. I think that's also something that we could spend some time on, which then brings me to our episode on micro moments. I think it was micro moments. That was episode 6. Giving ourselves a little bit of time, maybe not each day, but gradually working that into a routine of noticing our lives through the lens of love. What would that do? How would that change things? And if we're already doing that, how will that expand or deepen or enrich our experience? So those are the things that were coming up for me when you were talking about gratitude, when you're talking about appreciation and grief. And that just brings us back to the whole broken open and open to receiving. So there's definitely the through line of purpose, appreciation, and also I think there is also a through line of flow as well.
Oh my gosh, you just said flow, and I literally was writing down flow.
We are on the same wavelength.
We are.
Yeah. So what more can you say about that? As you were writing down flow, what was coming up for you?
Well, actually, I was writing it down because I also was thinking to think about flow as a placeholder, because I also was thinking about something else about micro moments, and just thinking about the significance of those in one's day-to-day in relationship to others. Again, not forced, but how one shows love through micro moments. And maybe that's for their own well-being and self. Maybe it's also toward other people. But I think I had originally contextualized in my mind micro moments to be a little bit more actions that help me get toward a specific goal or something. But now going back to this word of flow, right? These are moments that can flow out of you. These are micro moments that can, come out of you to show love, or express yourself. And that, I think, is an interesting concept that I would like to implement more too in my day to day of, I have these opportunities and maybe in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's really beautiful. Or, oh, I feel really good about this person, or I really enjoyed what they were talking about here. Expressing that, as a form of even just a micro moment of love flowing out of you, not just gratitude. So that's where I was going with the word flow, I think. Yeah. And what was coming up for you, L'Shawn?
Well, when I think about love and I think about well-being, I often think about, or I envision like a stream or river flowing, or it could be light as well, because light has that continuous stream or beam. And when I think about being, receiving love, being open to love, because love is always there. It's almost like energy, right? So energy cannot be created nor destroyed, can only be converted. And so I think of, I know nothing about electric currents and that kind of thing, but I think of like, when you have like a valve or something and you cut off electricity or you let it in, but it's always there. When I think of flow, I think it's the opening up to the stream of well-being that we all exist in all the time. And if we cut out through our thoughts, through our actions, through whatever, we can cut out that stream. We can be like a dam in the stream. And it's still there, the water's still there, building pressure. But and if we let it out, release the hold on it, or we are open to the flow, is one of the things that I'm thinking about. When I think about it, I'm thinking about the nature of love when I'm thinking about flow. And when I'm thinking about well-being, I strongly believe that well-being, love, those intangible, powerful forces that influence our lives are there. We just need to be open to them. When I think of flow, I think of opening ourselves up to it and letting it in. Because I do think it's a lot, has to do with reception and also perception. And there is a feedback loop. It's not just one way, it's going both ways. So I think if you can open yourself up to love and to well-being, you can also share that with your loved ones and even mirror for your loved ones what that looks like to be open to love and to be open to well-being, because they sense a calm or a peace that you have, and you can also give that to them as well through your demeanor, the way that you talk to them, the way that you treat them. That's what was coming up for me when I was listening to you and about flow. I think about the nature of love and the nature of these things like gratitude, purpose. And these things, like you were saying, it shouldn't be forced positivity or forced gratitude or forced purpose for that matter. Like forcing yourself to like have a purpose, you have to have a purpose. What is your purpose? You get really, like for me, I get really stressed out, and that does not help. I draw a blank, like what is my purpose? And then I get really depressed and get really closed off. So I think that kind of goes to the nature of these concepts that we are talking about. Flow, I think, is the through line or the commonality that each of these concepts have. That's what's come up for me. How about you, Eryn?
I like that. And I like the imagery you provoked with or evoked with the stream and the light. And I thought as you were talking, it reminded me of flow as a self-care strategy. And not that everything has to be strategies, but it was just like, oh, this concept of letting things in that way is a simple way for my mind to frame, self-care around this concept. I know we've been talking kind of at how love relates to all of our podcast episodes so far. I think one piece that I am still curious about, and maybe this goes to our curiosity episode, is I don't know if we want to get into unrequited love or if we want to get into the challenges of love. But I think, regardless, even with those challenges, curiosity is key to, that well-being with love and thinking about uh, how one feels love, relates to love, thinks about love, defines love. And even just starting there with those thoughts about love with somebody else um, can probably give one another some clarity around, how they are receiving love or not. So I don't know. Love is a challenging thing. It's a difficult thing because if I think of love, I think of it as over time. I also think of those micro moments with love that might be just an appreciation of beauty or something that, exists and then it doesn't. But thinking about a long time partner relationship or even a long time friend relationship, there's that is always going to be met with challenge. And without addressing challenge and engaging in the conflict or the difficult parts of the relationship, one kind of closes themselves out of that flow, right? Just because love is flowing doesn't mean that it's going to always feel easy or that it's always going to feel um, not, or it's not going to be in conflict. So I'm starting to wonder that maybe our curiosity episode, that podcast, could be a good one for framing a little bit more about the challenges of love.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think curiosity is the antidote to stress around that. If we can get curious about something that is causing conflict or resistance or disappointment, if we can get curious about that instead of judgmental, which we have talked about, the antidote to judging is curiosity. And I really love that you bring up unrequited love or the difficulties with love and relationships. Taking a curious stance in any conflict or any issue that arises in a relationship, in my experience, results in a feeling of love. Because when you're curious about something, you're like a child who's discovering something. You want to know, but not in like, I want to know, I got to know, but it's more like, ooh, I wonder what this is, like, wow, what's this? What's this? Or why is this? And so it allows for you to be more open to possibilities, to not be right, but just be curious about what's going on. I think that when we focus on in conflict or in difficulties in love, challenges in love, whether it's platonic or romantic, if we focus on who is right, and that's where judgment comes in, there's a winner or a loser. There's imbalance. But when we focus on curiosity, like, ooh, what's going on here? And we're not pointing fingers and we're not judging. We're just really curious as to what's going on, or curious as to how we can show love more, or curious as to how we can help the person feel better or whatever, then I think that really is a conduit to love. What do you think, Eryn?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on the concept of curiosity, like in its purity, being the only piece to conflict in love. I think it makes, and you didn't say it was the only piece, but I am thinking here, like, okay, are there healthy conflicts that don't stem out of curiosity, that bring light to things that need to be talked about or something? And then in that conversation, it's all about curiosity. So yes, I guess asking the question is curiosity in itself, like when you are in a state of conflict with a friend or a partner or whomever. But I'm also curious, like, does it always start with curiosity, or does there need to be a little bit of sassiness, for lack of better words, back and forth to then grow into curiosity? So yeah, and I know all relationships are different, and people express, love and conflict, differently. And so it's not this formulaic approach exactly. But it is something that I've been thinking about in terms of with love and conflict that shows up in relationships all the time. It's part of relationships. I guess the issue would be then is if you're not engaging in the conflict, but you're not opting for curiosity, then you're just apathetic. And so it's kind of like, well, where to go from there, right? And recognizing that curiosity is likely the ideal, but it also is a challenge in relationships. So, uh, yeah, that's where my mind went with that.
Well, I like that you added that, because I would say that perhaps curiosity be um would be a response as opposed to a reaction to a conflict, because often conflict arises because boundaries have been crossed, and boundaries are invisible. And until you cross someone's boundary or kind of get to someone's boundary, you don't know if that is a boundary, because my boundaries are not your boundaries. And what might be perfectly okay for me may not be okay for you. And then I might do something that's okay for me and then find out, wait, it's not okay for you. And I think the reaction to having a boundary crossed, I guess, or a boundary intercepted or whatever, I don't know, encountered, when you encounter a boundary, looking for words, is that initial, woo, okay, that's not going to work for me kind of thing, where it's like a reaction. So I would say, and I agree with you, I don't think that it's the be all and end all of relating to conflict. I do think it's a useful tool in our toolbox that we can turn to when we are exploring conflict, or when we're exploring things that may or may not work out for the other or ourselves. And I think there needs to be kind of an agreement in a relationship where when conflict arises, because conflict is actually, as you were saying, can be healthy. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict is a really good way to strengthen bonds, expand bonds, deepen bonds. Conflict can be a really great opportunity to learn more about the other person, to learn more about where this relationship is going. And like you said, it really spices things up too, because otherwise you just can be really apathetic and kind of going through the motions. But when a conflict arises, it's like a wake up call. Whoa, you can get really familiar or comfortable with someone over a long term, whether it's a relationship with a friend or a significant other. It's easy to kind of take for granted that the other person is going to be a certain way. And it's easy to forget that we are constantly changing, and we're learning and growing, and things that were a certain way 2 years ago or, last week may not be the case now. And so it's usually like a conflict that's like, oh, wait, you don't like that anymore, or that's not something that you're really into now, or that has changed. That especially happens with my children. They're always changing. It's like, oh, I thought you liked trains, now you like this. Okay. So oh, that song that you were playing forever over and over again last week is no longer a song you're interested in. Now you're on to the next song. So it's I do agree with you. I think that it's not the be all and end all. However, it is a useful tool to use when you're faced with conflict, rather than going at who's right, who's wrong, or what's right, what's wrong, and just being curious, and then maybe choosing what's best for us now that we've been really curious and explored all the options here, all the factors here. So I do think it's part of it, but it's not all of it.
Yeah, I love what you said about boundaries in the curiosity piece too, and how we're constantly changing. And so things are going to continuously look different between our relationships and who we are too. And so, engaging that curiosity allows us to be more open to the possibility of those changes, while also recognizing the conflict is sometimes necessary. And I think we have 2 podcasts really left to talk about, being in the new year and turning the page. So I think the natural segue for me is more on the being in the new year, and then just thinking about how the concept of love just flowing out of oneself is a state of being. And that is such a powerful place to live from, a powerful place to feel from. And that, can be fostered by nature or meditation or relationships or all these different things that bring love and health into your life in that way. So I don't even remember on that podcast episode if we brought love into the picture of being. Do you remember if we talked about it? Because if not, it makes so much sense now that it's such a part of it.
I think we may have touched on like self-love and acceptance and that kind of thing. I believe that we did touch on that, but I don't know. I feel like we did touch on self-love and acceptance in that being in the new year, just in the epised. Maybe our listeners can go back and listen to that episode and share it with your friends and family.
Right. But I will say, I've had to do more being. That's an interesting phrase, do and being in that way, since I've had this injury and have sat at home a bit more with it. And it's almost like I'm relearning part of who I am, which is fascinating because I thought that I was already holding space in this way, but I really haven't been. And it gets really hard in the, grind of life, right? With work, children, etc. And this is a nice reset. I feel gratitude, going back to gratitude, uh, for me to have a space of being. And it's been, I think, really healthy on not only my own, self-love and self-care, but also on my loving relationships with other people, with my partner, with my kids, and almost has led to a bit of a reprioritization of, my, I would say my values probably would be the best word there. So yes, having the opportunity to just be and go on light walks and like it's really nice. And it would have never happened without this injury. So I have love flowing through me in that way too, that I can appreciate this and what it's given me. Not to say that I also had moments of anger and a lot of other frustrations, but uh, I have this level of appreciation in relationship to being. So, L'Shawn, anything else you want to add on the topic of being?
I don't really have anything really to add to that, but I would kind of segue into the turning a new page, because I think that as you were talking about your new experience and how you've become aware of the fact that maybe you haven't held space as much to just being, and how that has led to you reprioritizing the way that you spend time with your family and the way that you are in the day to day. And that really is a great segue into turning a new page, which I think is a great segue into our coaching nuggets as we are close to the end of our time. So I would say that as you go through your day on this Valentine's Day, where people are giving gifts and expressing appreciation and love, where do you see love showing up in your life? And what does it feel like? How does love appear in your life? Is it, like we've said, a flow? Is it a warm feeling? What is love and how is it showing up in your life? How about you, Eryn? Any thoughts for coaching nugget?
Yeah, I would agree and would like to see what you just said, LaShawn, in my own life as well. And then additionally, adding in maybe what does that feel like for you when that love is flowing versus what LaShawn had talked about with the dams of the flow, where it's being kind of cut off for you. What does that feel like for you? Uh, and start to just recognize those small moments of where you are noticing that flow and how that's working for you. I will say one other summary here at the end. I just tried to keep track of some of the words that we talked about, thinking about love. I didn't think about it. It just came to me kind of as we were talking. It's like, oh, LaShawn said all of these amazing things, and I need to capture those somehow. But anyway, there's conflict and boundaries, and there's well-being, and there's purpose, and there's appreciation, and so much more in relationship to love. And so it's a complex topic, and the complexity of it really alludes to the richness of what love brings into people's lives.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.